Hey. What? How should I start every episode? What should I say?
Say yabba dabba doo.
You know, Max, I want to talk to you about incentive structures and governance models.
Great idea. I just had that on my mind.
You know, something that we talked about that was brought up on the latest microdose, and it was one of the first times I've ever seen you totally shocked, and that is the Bank of England's argument for CBDC in order to basically take money from the people and give it to the bankers. So I'm going to read you the specific sentence or two from the Bank of England's statement where they're arguing for this case. If digitization becomes sufficiently widespread so that cash is used much less, this opens up the possibility of having more deeply negative interest rates in the distant future without causing any negative effect on bank profits, since interest rates on all safe assets would become negative. So banks can maintain their net interest margin as bank deposits are no less attractive than other negative rate assets. So they're laying out what I would say looks like neo-feudalism to me.
Yeah, it is neo-feudalism. And it's also, the language is very threatening, right? They're saying, if you don't obey, we're going to start stealing money from your bank account using these central bank digital currencies and what are called negative interest rates or theft or, confiscation. And so it's very, very threatening. So the banks, we've been saying for a while that they're corrupt, and we've been saying that they are, engaged in massive fraud. And of course they pay a lot of penalties. I mean, that's not a contestable point, right? They've been involved in hundreds of crooked schemes now for 20 years, and it gets worse every single year. And the low interest rates make it easy. The cost of fraud is cheap at 0% interest rate, and that's why interest rates are at 0%, to keep the cost of fraud as cheap as possible. That's why when Jay Powell is asked, well, what about all this inflation, Jay Powell? Because the solution from the central bank level would be to raise rates, like they're doing in Russia, right? So Russia has responded over the past year with an aggressive rate rising because they say, hey, this is inflation and we need to do our job. But no other central bank is doing that. So, and Jay Powell or the Bank of England, they will say, actually, they'll look at you dead in the face and they'll say, it's not inflation, it's deflation. Okay, that's an outright lie. It's not deflation, it's inflation. So, and if you say, wait a minute, you're lying, they'll say, you know what, we're going to just start taking money out of your account. That's what we're going to do. So they've gone full Colonel Kurtz. They've gone rogue. They're up there without any accountability whatsoever. There's no laws, particularly in the UK. The UK is the worst regulatory environment in the world for banks. There's no laws. There's no regulations there. And now they've gone completely rogue.
So I want to say that I think this is just a continuation of the cycle of history. And why I say neo-feudalism is because it's a new form of feudalism. It's same as the old feudalism with a few twists. So I'm going to, this prompted me to go over to Google, do some searches, search up, feudalism and what it was. And I'm going to read you just a few things that I discovered. there's thousands and thousands and hundreds of thousands of web pages, all sorts of research and history about feudalism. So I'm only going to touch on just like what can fit into an hour. I'm sorry if there's any Karens out there who object to anything, but I'm just looking at a few things, and then we're going to liken them to what we see today in terms of how it's always there's one centralized power. It gives way, disintegrates through entropy, collapses, decentralizes, and then comes back to the center. So the feudalism was actually a time of kind of decentralization, because it was, say the hardcore of it was the 9th through the 14th century. So after the death of Charlemagne, up to the Black Plague, and then the Peasants' Revolt. So it started to disintegrate the structure of this. What you saw was there's no power in the center, right? They lost power. Deglobalization set in. We've talked about this. So there was no trade. The manors then became their own estates, kind of almost like a city state. They became their power. The Lord took the power. They had to... there was no globalization anymore, so they had to turn to wheat and grain to survive. But I want to read you just a few quotes about these and then compare them to our own time. So let's start with the definition. Under the feudal contract, the lord had the duty to provide the fief for his vassal, to protect him and to do him justice in his court. In return, the lord had the right to demand the services attached to the fief, military, judicial, administrative, and a right to various incomes known as feudal incidents. So the lord had the duty to provide the fief for his vassal. The vassal was the knight, and the knights controlled all the peasants that came with the land. So I had to till the land, give the money to the lord, and the lord then controlled that area and basically provided defense against the other lords, because in this disintegration of power, the entropy of the centralized power, you saw the feuding and fighting between the various lords trying to gain power.
Right, and again, the knights, of course, are given a very rosy historical treatment, aren't they? They're essentially the leg breakers of the lords to go out and break legs and collect money. They were the mafia hitmen of their day, but we remember them as the knights in shining armor and all the other propaganda to make it sound just like we have the celebrity gangsters and celebrity gangster rappers. We put a fine patina of celebrity and a dash of immortality. Right. So there you have it. The Middle Ages. There you have it. It's fiefdoms. You got the fief, which so the deglobalization, post-Roman Empire collapse, resulted in essentially what you would find on Rat Island, all the rats eating each other.
So I also want to turn to some more of this so you can compare it. So who are the leg breakers, of course? Is it like when the CBDCs, when the central banks are saying we want to introduce these CBDCs to ensure the profits of these banks? When we see Senator Warren saying we need to tax all wealth, everything you own, she wants to tax it, including cash, which presumably you've already paid tax on. Infrastructure bill, it has another $30 billion that they want to take from crypto. So who's being taxed? Like where's the structure and who's the centralized authority fighting the decentralization that has happened through the money supply, money system, which has never happened in history. This is the unique thing about breaking up this layer of neo-feudalism. So here's one from Google. Is feudalism good or bad? Feudalism helped protect communities from the violence and warfare that broke out after the fall of Rome and the collapse of strong central governments in Western Europe, i.e. Charlemagne. Feudalism secured Western Europe's society and kept out powerful invaders. Feudalism helped restore trade. And then here's the kicker, right? Compare it to today. Lords repaired bridges and roads. Isn't that always the excuse for why we need this powerful central government, why we need the American empire, is we provide bridges and roads, and who's going to fix the bridges and roads?
Yeah, that's right. And some of the same propaganda is moved up to the 21st century. Back in those days, the only way you could get richer is by taking somebody else's property, somebody else's land, right? So then after the Enlightenment, of course, and the beginning of free market enterprise and free market capitalism, there was a shift, toward the monetization of ideas. Right? I mean, you could have an awesome idea back in the Middle Ages, but it could only be used in warfare. Even Leonardo da Vinci, essentially, he made his money to pay his rent by designing war machines for his over there in Milan.
No, in Florence.
In Florence. He tried to do it in Milan.
He did work for the Duke of Milan.
Yeah, in Florence. And so that's where that was the sum total of how you could get, big time in those times was you go and you fight. And then in the Middle Ages, right? I mean, if you study, there's just warfare from soup to nuts every single day. So there's like slaughtering, war. So here in the 21st century, we have, and all that money would go to the central state, and the central state would mount the war. And because it's very expensive, you need a lot of guys. Okay, in the 21st century, actually, war is not how you gain wealth or territory, because we've gone into cyberspace, and a lot of the territory is in virtual space and intellectual property and patents, which none of that existed back then to the extent that they do now. And China, for example, they are filing 10 or 20 times more patents than the U.S. is filing. Right? Because they're actually looking to expand their reach, as we say in the modern world, not territory, but reach through patents and through into the cyber sphere, into the sphere of ideas. So, okay, here you've got a government in the U.S. and in the U.K., and they're saying, we are going to tax your entire net worth, all assets. If you already paid taxes on them, doesn't matter. We're going to tax them again because we need to feed our war machine. Okay. And we need to build bridges and roads. So let's think about this. So we're sending tax money, and in the United States, it's like $3 trillion a year. And all the wars that the U.S. has been involved with going back to the Vietnam War have been wars of convenience and wars of opportunity, where it's just a bailout of the defense contractors, right? There's no strategic reason for any of the wars the U.S. has been involved with since the Vietnam War going forward. Not at all. Or going even back to the Korean War, it's absolutely complete waste of time and money. But it does make a lot of contractors rich. Number two, how about some basic services like health, education, and those are two right there. Did they do it? Did they supply that in any way for my tax? No. In fact, they allow the inflation to kick in where it's 10, 20, 30 times more expensive than it was when I was a kid. So they're actually not only failing that, but they're handing the franchise over to profiteers and kleptocrats. Okay, how about the roads, building roads and things like that? I guess, yeah, you could say that the government does a good job building roads. Some states are different than other states. We've been in states where the roads are terrible. In our state, it's fine. Okay, do I need to pay them $3 trillion to keep the interstate highway operating? No, they can do that for $30 billion, right? So give me back 98% of my money and shut up, basically. So, I mean, that's where we're at. I mean, there's no viable reason for the government to exist other than to take out the garbage and maintain the roads. Other than that, there's no viable reason for the government to exist. And with Bitcoin, of course, people are opting out. They're saying, you know what, we're just going to opt out and, you guys work it out yourself.
So to me, it kind of seems like, humans came out of Africa. We were small tribes. We were able to feed ourselves resources, had our own space, our own, we would migrate all over the place to wherever there was a food available or whatever like that. Then we started to gather larger and larger populations, bigger and bigger families, bigger and bigger societies, communities. So it became negotiation and consensus, how to live together. How do these 1 million people in Rome live together? How do we negotiate this? How do we govern ourselves, right? So there are always like trade-offs, and the incentive mechanisms, the incentive structures within that society determine how successful it is and then how it collapses. So where did feudalism come from? If you ask Google what came before feudalism, Northern and Eastern Europe had tribal systems. The world never was largely feudal in its political organization, only Europe. And in Europe, feudalism was preceded by the slave-based economy of the classical Roman Empire, which gradually morphed into feudalism. So you had the situation whereby the emperor would incentivize allegiance from the nobles with more land, from which they would then be taxed more to finance the wars, to go get more silver and gold. And slaves were very important, a part of war, why they warred.
It's slavery 2.0. But they couldn't
This was slavery 1.0.
They didn't have money. Well, the Roman slavery was slavery of the Roman era. Then in the Middle Ages, they had the Middle Age version of slavery.
Serfdom.
Which was serfdom, because they couldn't afford to sail to other continents and grab slaves. They had to enslave their domestic population into what they called serfs.
Yes, so that we're kind of at that stage now, because the American Empire doesn't go get slaves, right? They have to enslave their own people in a way.
Yeah, that's the whole.
But power is always doing this. So the Roman Empire, the emperor got slaves to do all the work for the people, mostly the lords. Then when the Roman Empire collapsed and the emperors collapsed and their power disintegrated, the big central power disintegrated, what you saw was this, like, it did kind of diversify, decentralize a bit from one individual, one center of power to all these lords. And of course, the Roman Catholic Church is building up power at that time. And so you had the incentive for why the serfs became peasants, as they say, is that the feudalism helped protect communities from the violence and warfare that was everywhere. As you mentioned, it was just constant warfare all over the place. So you gave up your liberty essentially for security. Of course, that famous Ben Franklin quote, which is often, I guess, some say that it was misinterpreted, but nevertheless, it has a new meaning today, is that they gave up their liberty for security, and they became serfs because they were poor and there was no bread and circus for them. So they had to work the land, and they couldn't leave the land. Like you had to, once you were a lord's property, essentially you were his property.
Right. So in the American canon of thought and intellectual pursuits, there is this notion of freedom. And so freedom in the American sense is you're going to be free from war.
Yes.
You're free from religious persecution. We're not going to give you a pot to piss in. You have to go out there and figure out how to make a living. But you won't be encumbered by us warring. It says quite clearly in the articles of various incorporations of the United States of America that the United States would not go out there and interfere in other countries' affairs just for the shits and giggles. Like there would be, we're going to give you freedom from our centralized stupidity. And once you're free, you can then, you're free to pursue, enterprise, and to build stuff. And it's a new era. And there's new materials, there's new science, there's new ways to make money and to gain. So that's what freedom is. And so now what the problem right now is that the freedom is being taken away because the U.S. is engaged in wars all over the world for no reason other than to make the warmongers rich. So that cuts into the freedom. They are imprisoning people all over America. It's got a huge prison population, again, to profit the publicly listed prison companies, not because anyone's doing bad to the extent that they've got a prison population. And people are very sick. The life expectancy is declining in America for the first time in a long time, if not forever, because the pharmaceutical companies need to make money at your expense in this neo-feudalism. And the population's IQ in aggregate is dropping like a stone because education standards are being dumbed down, again, as a bailout to the education conglomerates. and universities. Okay, so here we are. We're no more freedoms, no more.
Except for, I want to step in because I want to say we're in an orange pill citadel. People who are in Bitcoin are already like, we're just watching. Like I Googled this. These are just cut and paste from Google, Wikipedia. It's in the history. I have nothing to do with this person in the 1300s. And yet, his story is being told in these pages. I look at the American population. I look at the European population. I look at the Australian population, the Asian population, Latin America, and I look at them as them out there. It might as well be a Google search, right? It's not something that we in the orange pill citadel have to concern ourselves with. So what I'm just saying is like, we're just observing what Bitcoin has delivered to us, what Bitcoin has delivered in terms of forever forever getting rid of that centralized power, because it's always been back and forth, and it's always been achieved, that centralized power, through sheer terror, through violence, through war, right? Like the chaos and war. Like, so the fact that Bitcoin is here has ended this. So that's what I'm saying is like, when we look outside in the world, we see the neo-feudalism, and perhaps we see it so well because we are orange pilled, because we have Bitcoin.
Right. So freedom in the sense of Bitcoin, people say Bitcoin gives you freedom. Okay. In the historical context of what that means, going back to the Roman days and the medieval days and the American historical days, this is what it means. You have unconfiscatable wealth that's guaranteed, mathematically guaranteed, to increase purchasing power for the next 100 years or more. You have uncensorable transactions, so you're free to commerce with anybody all over the world. Nobody can get involved, right? So that's freedom. That's real freedom. That's the kind of freedom that was dreamed about during the Renaissance and dreamed about during the Enlightenment, and that there were attempts to codify this freedom in documents, governance documents. And we have one governance document that is the governance document of all governance documents, and that would be the protocol, the Bitcoin protocol, which we see it working right now, and we see what's happening to the power structures that surround Bitcoin. They're panicking. They're trying to attack Bitcoin. But as I always say, Bitcoin is designed to be attacked, and it's going to keep attracting the biggest possible attackers that one can put together, because it needs to defeat. Every single attempt to squash Bitcoin needs to be defeated. So
the end of feudalism was the beginning of our new era of nation states, of then the Renaissance, and then the Enlightenment. The thing that ended feudalism is you'll recognize from our coverage of the beginning of the Renaissance 1.0, and that was the Black Plague and the Peasants' Revolt. So that's like a 200-year period of plague wiping out all the workers, the peasants, right? So they then had negotiating power to kind of build up wealth, and that then resulted in the Peasant Revolt a few hundred, like almost 200 years later. But if you look online and you look at the history, one of the sparks that caused the Peasants' Revolt of 1524 and 25 is that the Reformation. So Martin Luther was actually a huge inspiration to this. He, however, and this is why we don't have heroes, he hated these peasants, right? Hated them, and wrote a treatise on how we must kill and annihilate and destroy and slay and smite all of these peasants without any remorse, and destroy them, because all rebels must be killed. But because of the Reformation and the ideas on freedom, this inspired the peasants, who had been starting to build some wealth because of the power that they had for negotiation after the death of so many people from the bubonic plague. So between 100 and 300,000 peasants were killed. So Wikipedia, if you look up Peasants' Revolt, it says they lost, right? They definitely did lose the battle, but they won the war, because their sacrifice did end feudalism and pave the way for the Renaissance. Because remember, Martin Luther, the Reformation also helped lead to the Renaissance as well.
Right. And I see every day on social media coverage of the global uprising that's happening all over the world. Now, we've been talking about the global insurrection against banker occupation now for over 15 years.
Yeah.
And it's starting to really happen in real time globally right now. I tell you, it's interesting what happened 400,000 years ago.
Oh man, what
Would you
happened?
care to guess what happened 400,000 years ago, according to the archaeological records and mass study that's been done globally? What happened 400,000 years ago?
Satoshi Nakamoto was born.
What happened 400,000 years ago, according to archaeologists now in a new study, is that they see for the first time incidents of globally the idea of fire catching on. And that you see it happening all over the world suddenly.
I like the way you said fire catching on.
Yeah. So fire literally, went around like fire, right? So that would be that Prometheus moment when fire was given to humans, and they had they had this power suddenly to control fire. That idea spread like fire around the world 400,000 years ago. So humans before then were not, globally anyway. I mean, you have pockets of it, right? But globally, that idea didn't go global until that 400,000 years ago. So then, and then, that's an amazing moment for humans. 400,000 years ago, it's a pretty long time ago.
It gave us so much freedom from fear, right? Because of course we were so afraid of the forest and the woods with all those. We had a lot of huge beasts in roaming the wild back then. It protected us. It saved us. It helped us with preserving food, cooking food, saving us.
Right. So you have a nice cave. At the mouth of the cave is your fire. Keeps out the animals. Cook a nice sausage on there. Some woolly mammoth burgers. Stuff like that, right? So, but I never had heard, archaeologically speaking, what time frame that would be, and apparently that's it. That's the moment. So before then, I think that's when humans started to become human, more human-like. I mean, then if you have fire and you can roast meat, and then you're like, let's go hunt a woolly mammoth. Now we've got meat for 5 days. We've got this fire, so we've got some protection from all those critters trying to kill us in the cave. Let's invent Parcheesi. Let's paint some animals on the walls. There's
leisure time.
They got leisure time. They're like that the Homo sapien woman in the cave over there. I'm going to impress her. I'm going to draw a buffalo on the wall of this cave and see what happens. Maybe things that fire of spark could happen.
Right. So look at this. Right. The idea of freedom. Once it goes viral very fast. So fire spreads literally and figuratively, right? Because it expands your horizon to those 12 hours of the night that.
Well, you're controlling an energy, right?
Are close to you.
It's not out of control, wild energy. Just like with Bitcoin mining, you're converting energy into individual sovereignty, right? That never happened before. So this is as important. Bitcoin, there's 400,000 years ago, and then there's Satoshi Nakamoto, and everything in between those 2 points in time, 400,000 years, can be compressed into the time before Satoshi happened. Right. So we had 400,000 years basically twiddling our thumbs, waiting for Bitcoin. And then Bitcoin happened. And now we're going to actually see what being alive is all about as human beings. For the past 400,000 years, it's been a complete mystery.
And so then a couple hundred years ago, 1,000 years ago. Yeah. So in 1523, 24, you have the Peasants' Revolt caused by freedom, the idea of freedom. Once they realized that they could be free, for some reason, they had gone hundreds of years without realizing they could be free. And then they think they could be free, and they are free. Once you have one Satoshi, that's why one Satoshi, fuck you, money exists. Because once you have one Satoshi and you understand, you have to hold it to understand what that freedom is. It can't just be explained to you. You have to do it. You just have to get a Satoshi.
Plus, it's always difficult to organize a rebellion or an insurrection because of the Byzantine generals problem. Communicating over large populations for a rebellion, you're always going to have one person. Either you're going to have signal fallout, so the signals never get to where they're supposed to, or somebody in the mix is a traitor, which happens all the time. A third of the population in the colonies did not want a revolution, they preferred to remain as English, right? That's a third of the population wanted to remain as subjects of the crown. So that was a tough nut to crack. So it's always difficult to get a rebellion going. But with the blockchain technology at the core of the Bitcoin protocol, you have the synchronization of the signal and noise, and get rid of the noise and have only the signal. So therefore, all of those rebellious forces are pinpointed like a laser on one objective: get rid of the nation state, get rid of the central bank. Like
Yes.
this huge superpower, laser bombs from Star Wars.
History tells you it doesn't even matter. Like whatever they do, it's over for them. It's over for them, because once those sparks of freedom happen, that viral mind virus, that destroys you. That gets rid of that centralized power always. And before we turn to our guests, we're going to speak to Nozomi Hayase. I want to quickly read you, because I do have here the Byzantine generals problem, because this is important to this incentive structure and what we're going to talk to Nozomi about. The Byzantine generals problem is a game theory problem, which describes the difficulties decentralized parties have in arriving at consensus without relying on a trusted central party. In a network where no member can verify the identity of other members, how can members collectively agree on a certain truth? The game theory analogy behind the Byzantine generals problem is that several generals are besieging Byzantium. They have surrounded the city, but they must collectively decide when to attack. If all generals attack at the same time, they will win. But if they attack at different times, they will lose. The generals have no secure communication channels with one another, because any messages they send or receive may have been intercepted or deceptively sent by Byzantium's defenders. How can the generals organize to attack at the same time? So Bitcoin is the first to solve that.
In a perfect way.
In a perfect way.
Yes.
And this is
that's what makes it perfect money.
It's perfect money. And it's how to collectively agree on a certain truth. And that's what one Satoshi is. It's not only fuck you money, it's fuck you money because it's a unit of truth.
Yeah, I love in the history of warfare, there's always instances where the message was sent to the front and somehow a comma was missing or the wording was mixed up. And by the time the message got to the front, instead of retreat, it somehow became attack. And, it's a big mess. But or that game of telephone that we played as kids, right? Everyone's in a circle and you start with one part of the circle and you say a sentence. And by the time it gets all the way around the circle, and then the last person says what they heard, and it's radically different than what the original sentence was because of the noise that creeps in every time. Or what they say is a copy of a copy of a copy of a copy. I'm so old, I remember copy machines, which were not photocopy machines. They used
Xerox. Oh,
carbon
copy.
Right. And to make copies of copies, you had to make a copy with the carbon copy, like it's a carbon, it's a layer of carbon, a piece of paper. And then this makes a carbon copy. This is where the CC comes in. When you CC on an email or BCC, the CC stands for carbon copy. And if you make a copy of the carbon copy, there's fallout. And then eventually you get a copy of something and it's like, nothing to read there. It's all gone, right?
That's what neo-feudalism is. That's what I'm saying. They're trying to steal your wealth. It's a carbon copy of the old feudalism. They're just like, it's not even as good as the old feudalism. They're just like, they don't even give you anything, right? Like at least you got some home and shelter back then.
Yeah, a lot of people argue that the feudal serfs of those era live better than the people in the trailers and the opiate addicts in the United States, right? At least the feudal serfs had land and they had a little hut and they could raise a family and they ate, they didn't starve to death, and they were poor and dirt poor, but they even developed this idea of the noble serf or the noble proletariat, which is informs a lot of the thinking behind the Bolshevik Revolution.
Yeah, yes, Marx and Engels wrote a lot about that peasants' revolt. Nevertheless, it's time now to talk further about trust, about love, about the consensus model, about all these sort of incentive structures that guide humans throughout history, and how Bitcoin has delivered the perfect answer to this conundrum throughout our history of how do we all live together.
All right, this is awesome. Well, this interview is going to be spectacular. I just read Nozomi Hayase's latest piece in Bitcoin Magazine, Stacy. It's another tour de force.
Yes, the title of that is Bitcoin Transforms Evil into a Greater Good. The duality of evil and good are reconciled in a technology designed to acknowledge inherent human characteristics. So Nozomi, I want to talk to you about Satoshi's grace. This is a pretty fascinating piece you have here. Welcome to Orange Pill Podcast. Welcome back.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's always nice to be with you.
I'm going to read this quote because, you say it better than I could ask in this question. So I'm just going to read you this and we'll elaborate on this point here.
Okay.
The New Testament was said to have brought a covenant of grace. With this, humanity is allowed to repent their transgressions, not by perfect compliance with a God's will, but by faith in his forgiveness. In this process, no priests, prophets, even Jesus himself can insert their authority and intervene in one's relationship to the divine. Satoshi, with the invention of the consensus algorithm, established a new contract in which individuals can now directly connect to the source. Through simply trusting math, now each of us can claim virtues within ourselves and align our actions with truth and honesty. This is Satoshi's grace. The Bitcoin protocol now helps us rescue ourselves from the separation within ourselves, from falling under the sway of the autocratic Fiat regime. That's pretty profound. Let's elaborate on this. Satoshi's grace. Go into that more.
Yeah, so I think the problems that we are facing in our society is to do with the fact that we now have inadequate structure of morality, and that archaic, what Fiat system has is this archaic old structure of morality that promotes the dualistic sense of good and evil, and through this, of course, the trusted third parties, central banks, and nowadays the Silicon Valley tech giants, that they insert themselves as a position of the God, and then they are engaging censorship and restriction of information, and then basically telling everybody like, this is not right. This is wrong, and we are going to censor you. We are going to restrict your transaction, etc., etc. So what Satoshi did basically with the invention of Bitcoin is that it opened up a space to the source. So basically now everyone can directly connect with the source and then have a personal relationship to God, or the image of God, whatever we like to define it. And so then we can actually, each person now can engage in the process of cultivating their own morality, their sense of right and wrong, bypassing the central authorities. And then for me, what I find is the reason why I think it's Satoshi's grace is that the current, the structure of morality that is promoted in our current system is based on the misunderstanding of our human nature. And in some ways, I think that whoever that established this morality thought that certain attributes of ourselves, such as competitiveness or aggression or self-interest, people who act out of self-interest, to be something negative. So somehow we were made to think that these are our simple nature, right? So then that induce sense of guilt and create a compulsion within ourselves to do good. So you see that, especially I think I see them with the left progressives, that when they engage in virtue signaling, right? They wanted to tell other people what to do because they want to be good, and that they want to prove their innocence. They want to be free from sins, so that the people just engage in what amounts to kind of pathological pursuit of becoming, to proving that they are good, they are worthy, they are free from sin, etc., etc. And then Satoshi basically told us, demonstrated by creating this genius of economic incentive that what we were sought to believe to be sinful, the negative sinful, something that we need to, somehow overcome or eradicate from ourselves. These are not sins, and that we are all forgiven by nature, that everything that, belong to ourselves, whatever the qualities that we have, they are inherently good, that we are all, each person is born with certain virtue. And the virtue is different than, the morality. Virtue is something innate, that we all have innate, capacity to be good. So we don't have to become good. We don't have to try to be empathic or compassionate or, try to prove that we are good. The Satoshi basically say, we are all good. All we have to do is just accept our innate nature, and which include selfishness. Selfishness, is virtuous. So that's why I think that I see that as Satoshi's grace, because in some ways that we are allowed to forgive ourselves, we are allowed to claim our own selfishness, and that's why I think that. And that Satoshi's grace, it's distributed across the network, because it's Bitcoin is a decentralized network. So unlike the existing hierarchical capitalism that try to create a trickle down grace into the economy, but it's never actually trickled down to the bottom, right? Because it's always interfered in the process by trusted third parties. But Satoshi's grace is just directly available to anyone who want to receive it, because it's distributed. Does it make sense?
Yeah, I like that, because we were just talking in the first part before we turned to you about the peasants' revolt of the 1500s
Right.
in Europe, and that was partly caused by the Protestant Reformation. The idea of having a direct relationship with God, and that you didn't have to go through the church or your emperor or anybody like that.
Right.
So we're likening the situation today to the orange-pilled Bitcoin community as a pleb revolt. Like once you see that you've been stuck in that duality of like, you're just a passive peasant out there, and the elite will take care of you and just do what they say and keep on paying your taxes and just like obey. But so Bitcoin is giving that direct relationship between you and money, and that's the first time in a long time.
Exactly. And then, right now the fiat system has its own moral code, as I described. It's a very archaic system, that in my opinion, it's very outdated, and it doesn't really function well. And it actually does not really produce moral value, because it's based on the erroneous perception of, God image, or who we are. And this moral code is running at the deeper level within our psyche. So then it's, we are made to act in a certain way. We are compelled to act a certain way. And this is, strategically done by the electoral politics and identity politics and all that stuff, right? So that they're stimulating and activating and triggering people, and so that they are, basically made to act, to seek for acceptance, seek for approval, validation, that they they are, it's kind of like seeking for like credit, social credit system that is akin to what's happening in China, for instance. That we now are moving into that direction. And what Bitcoin did was Bitcoin basically introduced a new code of ethics, and then it's now through the Bitcoiners, the Pleb, basically embodying this new code, this new morality, new sense of morality that does not create this the opposition of good and evil, but it's a morality. It means it's being neutral in terms of accepting all aspects of life is inherently good. And then that is now disrupting our society. And I find it so magnificent that how really the code, simple protocol, can do the magic. And we don't have to engage in this, social justice work, or we don't have to tell other people what to do. We don't have to do the virtue signaling and try to change somebody's mind. We just simply stack sats and just to sit back and watch and then align ourselves with the truth inherent coded in this protocol.
Yeah. We know how Bitcoin disintermediates central banks, and gets rid of the Wall Street banks.
Right.
And I've been saying for quite some time that it also gets rid of religion, because religion is an intermediary between us and God. And as you're describing it, Bitcoin gives you direct contact. You don't need an intermediary. It's an uncensored contact with God, only possible with Bitcoin. So, this is under discussed, people, because immediately when you say, oh, Bitcoin actually does away with the need for religion, people, that's a trigger. People are triggered by that because there's a fanaticism that ties to all religions. And actually, this is completely unnecessary.
Yes, it is completely unnecessary. And especially in the West, that there is this idea of original sin, that sense of guilt, and that the Judeo-Christian moral narrative very much promoted this, this narrative that we are sinful and somehow like we have to repent and we have to overcome our sinfulness and become good. And we are moral creatures, unlike other mammals. Other mammals don't invent image of God. They don't need to create a moral structure. But we humans are moral beings. We seek for meaning, and we want our action is very much guided by our sense of right and wrong. So when we have this moral narrative as a programming, running within ourselves, then we think we are free, but we are actually not free because our actions are governed by this moral code. And that's part of, that's what central banks are doing. The central banks, use their own money to promote this moral code. And unless we dismantle this moral code, no good is going to come about in the world, in my opinion.
Right. Dismantling the moral code. Well, we've had something else which is somewhat modern, going back to the 1800s, and that was another attempt to codify moral code and to deal with moral code, and that was kind of Sigmund Freud and the invention or the discovery of the subconscious and unconscious. And according to Freud, so much is tied to sex. This ties into the moral code because in religions, typically sex is equated with immorality. Simultaneously, one of his students, Carl Jung in Switzerland, really went down a different path and talked about the collective unconscious and that as the architecture of the mind. And you talk about Carl Jung's work in your essay. And I always thought there was a connection with Bitcoin because this search for God, as you point out, it does require something of a simultaneous effort by all humans simultaneously on planet Earth to harness our collective unconscious. What Jung called synchronicity, what we call the blockchain, right?
Yes, definitely. Synchronicity happens when we are aligned with, what Jung called as individuation process. It's a process of becoming, unique individual, the person you are born to be. And right now, this process has been intervened by central banks and, their fiat system that trying to interject their image of God, and then we are basically derailed from this path of individuation. So synchronicity are replaced by cause and effect. That they are the ones who create the cause and then an effect, and that in many ways our actions are very much restricted. And then now with Bitcoin, removing these intermediaries allows each person to directly connect to the force of the universe. And then force of the universe, of course, when we are aligned with the power of the universe, we would experience synchronicities. We would have, meaningful coincidences. And, the universe sends us help, people, situations, and all kind of stuff. And I'm seeing, Bitcoiners experience these synchronicities, and then they share, their own personal experience. And I find it that what is inside a Bitcoin network is really, it's a kingdom of heaven, and the kingdom of heaven in which I think each of us could align ourselves with nature or the force of the universe.
Right. Well, you also quote the Lord's Prayer, reads, lead us not to temptation, but deliver us from evil. The incentive structure of the Lord's Prayer. And then turn to Robert Walensky, who, because let's talk about this, like we're all in Bitcoin, securing the network by being part of it and mining and running nodes and hodling and using.
Right.
Satoshi introduces a cost equation to cheating collusion via the proof of work protocol, making the cost of attacking the network clear to parties and having them pay it up front. Furthermore, by making the rewards for playing the rules higher than the value of attacking the network, it can proactively protect the system. So, I mean, Max and I were just talking. We talked about the Roman Empire and how that fell apart, and then feudalism rose, and we went from a slave-based economy to a serf-based economy. Now we seem to be some sort of mix of those economies, serf, slave, to debt servicing, never being able to get ahead, never being able to accumulate because of all the inflation, all the money printing, all the cantillionaires. So the Bitcoin removes that power structure, the centralized power. That nature there tends to be a centralizing power in human society once we got over, I guess, a certain size of tribes and people on Earth. So like this removes that, and it's always been around money, right? It's always about who controls the money. And now this is such a radical experiment to bring out the good even in who would be leaders, the people who would rule us.
Right. Well, I think the genius of economic incentive really is that, in Bitcoin network, no one is made to act against their will. Everyone is acting freely. And that's the one important thing to observe. The miners, they are acting greedy, and then, out of, their own self-interest, and then everyone is free. And in fiat system, no one is acting freely, right? Because they are either acting to escape from punishment or to prove that their goodness, good virtues, and in Bitcoin, basically saying you can just be who you are, act according to your nature. And I think that is very revolutionary. And again, go back to Satoshi's grace, that allowing each person to be who we are and act freely, because Satoshi removes the levers of control, and that the incentive is not based on punishment, but based on reward. So Satoshi, by incentivizing greed, but at the same time, rewarding honest behaviors, making those who play by the laws, the rewards to be higher. It allows everyone to be free, and that is, we never had that kind of system before. And then somehow each person acting out of freedom, we can generate a new kind of moral value. Somehow it creates greater good. That's what I observed. Instead of trying to eradicate what is considered to be evil, but just learning to work with it. So then, like Jesus said, love thy your neighbor, but also Jesus said, love thy your enemies, right? So Bitcoin really convert enemies into allies, and then connecting everyone, uniting everybody, all participants in the network to create a greater good.
Right. And so let's look at the world population. Most people around the world fear financial insecurity, right? Most people are living hand to mouth, or many people are starving. So let's introduce Bitcoin into the mix. It's unconfiscatable. It's guaranteed mathematically to increase purchasing power forever. So the fear of financial insecurity is wiped away. and with it, much of the fear quotient, I guess you could call it, of the population of humans on Earth. So what will things be like when people have less fear than they have now? When fear, the disease of fear, is basically eradicated by the inoculation of Bitcoin.
The Bitcoin really allow us to align with our self-interest, and then it helps those who are willing to act out of self-interest, right? Those who want to protect and save ourselves. And the fiat system, one of the major weapons that the central banks of the world use is fear, right? Provoking fear, like saying this is, you're not gonna able to get a job, or you're gonna end up being on the street, et cetera, et cetera. There's certain kind of fear, whether it's words or they have plenty of way of creating the fearful scenarios. And the those who have bitcoins, because Bitcoin is unconfiscatable. I mean, you can just no one can touch your Bitcoin. So then, of course, that it moves us from this kind of survival instincts, like we can start just thinking about what we want to do. Being free from this kind of instinctual, this base level of survival need, and I think that Bitcoiners are free to kind of take the path of individuation process, as Jung put it. So then we can start to more explore ways for us to become unique individual and find the gift and share this gift in the world. So it is facilitating the new creation of new world, definitely.
So in 2 weeks' time, it'll be the 50th anniversary of the Nixon shock. So when the U.S. went off the gold standard, we've had an all fiat world, but also domestically. Look at the numbers, though, of if you're looking at a system just from the data it spews off behind it. Look at the life expectancy. Look at all sorts of things like that. Look at, like, you're a psychologist, a liberation psychologist. So when you see those 90,000 people last year in America overdosed, 90,000 people, that's like wartime sort of death rate from just people committing suicide, essentially. That's not even just like the outright suicides of people jumping off bridges or shooting themselves. This is like opioid overdose. And so what does that tell you about that system, the incentives, the governance, the model, the health of that economy?
I mean, the elite obviously really don't care about us. They are only thinking about their own to expand their wealth and try to control the rest of the population. And then with this said, that they don't really care, people dying, whether people become ill, develop mental illness, or they die out of poverty. They really don't care. And as you know, that there is effort. The central banks are now trying to upend their scheme by creating CBDC, central bank digital currency, and they are working with this initiative of the Great Reset, right? And they have Vatican involved, the Pope is there, part of it, and then Joe Biden and prime ministers and president around the world and UN and those leaders, they're trying to reset the economy, right? And in that vision, I mean, again, going back to perhaps the structure of morality, that is the basis of our Western civilization. That it's based on basically materialism from my perspective, and it does not acknowledge death as a part of life. That they want to, because they only inherently believe that whatever they can sense through five senses, the only thing that exists. And then they are afraid of death, and then they want to have attain eternal life in this physical domain. And from my perspective, they're actually trying to do it on the internet. They're trying to create this immortality in the virtual reality. And the Google already, for instance, is developing this augmented reality, virtual reality, and then they can some people just put things, and then they can have this virtual nirvana, so to speak, right? And then so that's the elite vision of the world is sucking people into the digital space, and then we will kind of made to have that we will be disconnected from our body, and that we will forever live, perhaps inside the computer internet. And again, that's not something that we all agree to. I think many people don't want to live forever like that. Like for instance, I want to die and then come back as a new person, because I believe in the concept of reincarnation. And that choice, it's a choice to really, invent the universe, the metaphysical reality that has been taken away. That's the serious violation of the First Amendment, to be honest, because it's the first part of the freedom of religion, right? So that means that each of us should have our own unique construct of afterlife, and that's the Fiat system is preventing people from exercising that choice. So then they would be sucked into this monopolized version of afterlife. And so that's, I think, where things are going. And the Bitcoin again gives us choice, so that people who want to have a different afterlife, like myself, I can now opt out from this. The Great Reset's idea of living in forever inside the cyberspace.
So we have these. You use the phrase "opt out." And Bitcoin gives you an opt-out from the system that has been running the Western economies and societies, right, certainly, for thousands of years. Like it's a cycle of power. It never relents, right? It never just gives up. It always morphs into something else that you'll obey and submit to. And Bitcoin, we discuss is one Satoshi. That's it. That's all it takes. One Satoshi is fuck you money, because it changes your mindset. It changes your concept of time. It changes everything in the world for you. And this is so revolutionary. And I suppose you would think that this is going to be partly the cause of that sort of relentless optimism and the sort of positivity you see in this Bitcoin community.
Exactly. I think that one of the things that Bitcoin really help us attain is the individual sovereignty, that we now know that we have power. So it's not, the external reality does not dictate our reality, but it's the what is inside, that creative power inside is actually, allowing us to imagine the world that we wish to live in, and that choice that has been taken away from us, and now Bitcoin gives us this choice, so that we can actually not observe whatever happening outside, but then we don't have to, we have a choice to disengage with it, or to be a part of it, what extent we want to be a part of it, or we would opt out and choose a different option. And so that is very powerful. I think that we never had this until now. I mean, in human history, in my opinion. And as I said before, that this whole prevalent dogmatism of materialism that has never been challenged. And I think that it's good for people like Native Americans, for instance, or people who are not really truly subscribed to this metaphysical concept of reality that the West imposes on those populations, that they now are given choice to actually live based on what they believe in. And so now we have an option that we can live in this materialistic reality. I mean, that's part of our reality, but those who wish to experience life differently, that they can freely do so.
Right. You mentioned the Native American population here in the United States, of course, living on reservations, an open air prison system now for 100, 140, 150 years, 160 years. And with the adoption of Bitcoin, they would be able to return to their culture unimpeded by the overlords because the Bitcoin is unconfiscatable and uncensorable. So they could become sovereign, and in so being, they would be reconnected to themselves in their spiritual way. You know, people are talking about the same thing for Palestinians, right? I wrote a story about this about 6 or 7 years ago, that the Palestinian central bank should go Bitcoin centric as a way to become sovereign. You know, it's interesting you mentioned that Bitcoin, the idea that Bitcoin seems to transcend the boundary of death is interesting. You know, I read a story a few years ago about some cemetery was introducing Wi-Fi. And I wrote on my Twitter stream about, wow, this means you could take Bitcoin into the afterlife, right? And I started thinking about this and tweeting about it. Now, you know, Michael Saylor, who runs CEO of MicroStrategy, was just on CNBC, I believe it was, saying that one of the laws of the life is death and taxes, but Bitcoin, you can take it with you after death. Okay, so that overturns thousands of years of religious dogma. It overturns everything anyone knows about the physical reality, and yet nobody on CNBC questioned him about this. They just said, "Oh yeah, I suppose." Yeah. So, you know, here's a CEO of a company saying that we've conquered death with Bitcoin. It's no longer a boundary. And everyone's just nodding their head like, yeah, that's great. So is it just the subtlety of the protocol is changing people's unconscious mind all over the world, and they understand now that there's death is just this construct? Really, it doesn't even exist.
I mean, I personally believe in the concept of reincarnation, and I know from my own, research that the many major religions, including Christianity, actually had a concept of reincarnation, like gnostic Christianity, but that was taken out of the scripture. And nobody actually proved that there isn't reincarnation, for instance, and there, nobody has proved that there is such things as karma, right? But that doesn't mean that it doesn't exist, because the fact that the people who believe that this life is only this physical body, when we were inside the physical body, and after so-called we die, then we disappear, and then that's it. That has not been proven either. So we now basically, objectively speaking, we only have two different perspectives of life, right? And then why not just each person is given choice to experience life differently, and that choice has not been given. And so I think, and then just even the hypothesis that if we believe that there is such thing as a reincarnation, if we believe there is such things as karma, right? Then maybe if we take this view, how that affect our life, how it changes the way we behave. And then I find it to be very profound, because if I believe that, okay, my life, myself as Nozomi Hayase, I'm just experiencing in space and time, but, this is just my one lifetime. And then, whatever I've done in this life will be carried away and carried out to the next one. And I am spirit and eternal, I would change my life. I don't feel like I have to, consume a lot, and I have to accumulate wealth, and I have to become someone, et cetera, et cetera. I could be more at peace with myself and align with, whatever the destiny or whatever is set out for me to do. So, we never tried this experiment before. And I think Bitcoin provides the option for humanity to actually experiment on this. So then, yeah.
I just read something interesting. So apparently, according to archaeological studies, approximately 400,000 years ago, it was determined that human tribes around the world who had observed other tribes experimenting with fire, but because there was no trust between the tribes, the idea never spread. Then suddenly, 400,000 years ago, as the human population was growing, that tribes of humans would accept an idea from another tribe instead of outright rejecting it immediately as being quote unquote evil or not us. And then this idea of using fire by humans productively spread like wildfire. Literally, this was the first instance of fire spreading like fire. of a mind virus happening 400,000 years ago. So here we are, cut to Bitcoin. Bitcoin is similar in that every 10 minutes with each new block, the past is done. It's completely hard-coded into the blockchain, and there's no revisionism. There's no revisitation. There's nobody going to say that we can't trust the past and we have to rewrite the past, and this is how you look at the past. No, it's done. We know what it is. It's on the chain. We just examine it. It's transparent. And we have also, a lack of fear for financial insecurity because we own unconfiscatable money that's guaranteed mathematically to increase its purchasing power forever. And according to Michael Saylor, we've conquered death. And Max Kaiser, I should say, was the first to point that out. So, I mean, it would seem like Stacy says that the future is relentlessly optimistic. So at the moment, there seems to be incredible angst around the world. There's geopolitical tensions are high. The economies are stressed. Opiate overdoses are high. Is this just basically the tremors before we have the big reveal at the end is essentially God 2.0?
Exactly. I mean, it is God 2.0. I think what is working through Bitcoin protocol is, Christ, or some kind of divine universal forces or whatever. And I think that once you understand the genius of this protocol, from my experience, I kind of really bow down to the protocol, and that I don't feel like I have to change the world, anymore. All I have to do is I will step out and allow the protocol to do the magic. And that, I think that's, and that protocol, what's inside the protocol is so revolutionary, and it gives us optimism, right? Because I see, when I understand it, it gives tremendous hope. And then that basically become contagious, that when each person truly understands the revolutionary force inside the protocol and then act out of it, align themselves with it, then that become contagious and spread around the network. And so that, that is a really good, better way of changing the world and solve any social political problems than, what the Fiat regime is doing. Because the Fiat regime is basically based on fear and provoke fear, and then they try to change everybody. They try to convince people to do something or control the things outside of themselves, and then they have to engage in big sales and then marketing and propaganda to do this, and then obviously it's not working because it's not what everybody is made to forced into doing something and not, acting out of freedom. And on the other hand, the Bitcoin.
Right. So we're going through the pain of childbirth. So Mother Earth, the cosmic mama is pregnant with God 2.0. And we're experiencing the pain. A woman going through childbirth, you see her, she's going through a lot of pain, right? She's screaming, she's yelling, she's pushing this thing out. And then, here comes the baby, and everyone's happy and smiling, and it's all beautiful. So this is what we're going through right now. The world is going through the birth canal, okay? The God 2.0 is coming through the birth canal, the cosmic birth canal. We're about to have this global revelation. And so right now it's painful, but we have to have that pain. We won't, it's proof of pain, proof of work, proof of pain. And we're all experiencing it.
And also we are now, experiencing or confronting the shadow of our humanity, which has become beast-like, the evil forces. And so that we have to get through it. And as I see it, we are now, humanity collectively is going through some kind of rite of passage. And then, as you said, it's a painful process, but we have to get through it in order for us to be reborn. And the Bitcoin is facilitating this process. And then, all the darkness, the shadows, everything is just coming out. And then you see in Twitter, for instance, or social media, that the people from the Fiat world really criticize Bitcoin, especially the alleged, Bitcoin's the mining energy consumption, right? So I've seen the environmentalist that comes in and then criticize Bitcoin's mining energy consumption, and then Bitcoiners come in to respond, and he, of course, called the Bitcoiners as, oh my goodness, you guys toxic, toxic masculinity, that Bitcoiners are toxic, that they have this toxic masculinity. And again, that's a part of, the shadow coming out, because our society has suppressed the what, attribute that belong to masculinity, that they just kind of label them as being aggressive, violent, and it's not good. So then these aspects of ourselves that are pushed into the unconscious, they're held hostage, and now they're going to come back to us, so then, the people in the fiat world, I mean, they have to face these shadows, so that's what we are seeing. And then I find it to be quite kind of interesting to watch how people react to Bitcoiners, because Bitcoiners activate, Bitcoiner triggers these shadows in people who are deeply embedded in the fiat system.
That's interesting, because when you guys are talking about God 2.0 and stuff, of course, God 1.0 revealed himself through the Word. In the beginning was the Word. Mm-hmm. And then now in the beginning was the code. Here's, October 31st, 2008. Hey, look at this code, this white paper for, Bitcoin. And it's interesting that that's the communication method to deliver the message of freedom and liberty, essentially. Right. Definitely.
Well, we've been on the search for a while, and to find God, and you find this in art, you find this in science, you find this in religion, you find this in literature, you find this in love, and based on the level of chaos at the moment, it seems like we're about to witness. Bitcoin's been around for 11 years. All the major central banks, the IMF, World Bank, those people are freaking out. Central bank digital currencies are definitely a panic move by them that are guaranteed that they're dead at birth. They're stillborn, right? There's nothing. There's absolutely nothing. Mm-hmm. So we're about to see this. So I don't know why, after 400,000 years of humans, our generation is going to watch this happen. But I think something else you said that was interesting is that actually you praise Bitcoin, and you come to the understanding for yourself that there's really nothing you can do at this point to change the world except just sit back and hold your Bitcoin.
Right. Because I think the great secret that has been kept from us throughout history is the fact that we are God. We embody the divine, and we are made to seek for God or authority outside of ourselves. And what Satoshi did with the invention of Bitcoin is to simply show us the face of the God, which is, reflect who we are. So that's why Satoshi is anonymous. Satoshi Nakamoto remained to be anonymous, so that each person can see their own faces as divine, and once we understand this, game is over. The central banks who, they try to act as God, they lose their power because they are not God. Each person is God.
It's also interesting how some people who look at the Bitcoin protocol, it brings out the worst in them, not the best. Right. So in that fact, so we have people in Bitcoin who've been around for a while who hard forked Bitcoin, right. and they are experiencing tremendous pain. Like they invited so much pain into their own lives. And so that is also a choice one makes. No one needs to be a victim. Exactly. You only choose to be a victim.
Right. And then only each person can save ourselves, not anyone outside, and those kind of, I think that what you're describing is that Bitcoin comes to our life and we each has a choice to accept it or deny it or do anything to do with it. And as a part of, truly accepting Bitcoin is that we have to confront our own shadows, because the Bitcoin is light. that is emanating, from our own darkness, and it would trigger us. It would show us the part of ourselves that are dark. And when I say dark, I don't mean negative and bad things. It's just simply the part of ourselves that we suppressed, we somehow denied that, belong to ourselves, and then and we decided to kind of project them out there. So it's a painful process, because we have to discover ourselves anew. Like, oh wow, I have this self-interest, I have greed, man. I thought that I'm a good person, I don't have greed, but I am greedy. So that's a part of confronting our own shadow, and then accepting it, saying, oh, okay, I'm greedy, and that's fine. I have this, maybe toxic masculinity, that's fine. So you have to step by step start to embrace all aspects of ourselves, and that's relate to self-love. And the Bitcoin really facilitated that process. So I think that people who reject Bitcoin and started to criticize Bitcoin, that they turn away from this process of integrating their own shadow.
Well, I liked your message of game over for the central banks and for these people who would seek to assert power over others and thus intervene in their own life journey. If, as you're talking about the cycles of lives and many lives and reincarnation, if somebody's trying to intervene and thwart your own journey, that's an ultimate evil. But so obviously our audience is so engaged in this conversation right now. Is there any way, to follow up on your work, or where should they go? How can they contribute to, your whole journey?
So the best way to follow my work is my Twitter, Nozomi Imagine. That's my Twitter handle. And then you can also visit my website, nozomihayase.com. And I also write for Bitcoin Magazine. So that's, you can always check my newest articles there.
Well, we're big fans, and everybody in our audience in the Orange Pill Podcast Telegram group loves your work. So we all support you. And thanks so much for joining us yet again.
Thanks.
Thanks for having me.
Right. Well, that is Nozomi Hayase. And I think, just such great insight into how Bitcoin changes the incentive structure, changes you, and brings so much relentless optimism to the space, right? The relentless optimism is the perfect consensus model.
Yeah, and I think Bitcoiners lose sight of this. When a new player comes into the mix who's attacking Bitcoin, people forget that they can never win because of all the things Naomi's talking about. We've got a new round of antagonists in the story. The Washington lawmakers are proposing new laws and regulations, and I see Bitcoiners on Twitter who are like, we need, what are we going to do? We need to get some players in Washington. We need to get a lobbying group. We need to get a PAC. We need to fight this. And, the fight's we already won the fight on January 3rd, 2009, so there's no doubt in my mind that the fight ended on that day. And, but everyone's free to do whatever they're going to do, that's fine. And so what she's saying is really key to keep this in mind, keep the faith going, and there is a lot of faith involved, in all of this. I had a debate on Clubhouse last week about faith versus, commitment. That was the debate, and commitment is more of a process-based word, more of an action-based word. I have a commitment and faith is less, it's on the warm and fuzzy side. And I come down on the side of faith really as being a perfectly suitable word in describing what is at the core of the zeitgeist, or I should say the gestalt of what is germane to the triumph. The seed of triumph was already there in the Genesis block. That was the winning moment.
You have one Satoshi, fuck you, money, and it's a unit of truth. And money has been the most important development and contracts to human development and societal development and the growth of civilizations for thousands of years. We got on boats and we got on horseback and traveled around the world in order to trade. And we traded, for units of truth of what the value was represented in that goods or services you were trading. And I think, anyone who's trying to stop it is not only stopping the inevitable that has already happened, and it's immutable and uncensorable. There's no stopping it now. Just like throughout history, even when those peasants had no power like that we have so much more power at our fingertips. Whether we have our fuck you money, but we also have like the ability to travel much easier than they could, right? They could be hunted down and dragged back to the farm. And there was no way for them to survive. But
there was no way to protect your wealth.
No.
That was beyond the reach of those who were looking to confiscate it. That was impossible up until Bitcoin. Bitcoin is the first time that everybody in the world has private property, access to private property that's unconfiscatable. That's never, ever happened before. And that will change everything.
Well, you mentioned that the way to get rich back then was to take somebody else's stuff, right?
Yeah.
So Bitcoin solves that problem too. Like you're all incentivized, like that. Even the 51% of attack, you would lose more money than you would gain. Like you can't gain. So it doesn't pay to be dishonest in the system. So all we've had in history is the opposite, that we've never had a system where you can guarantee that you could have a trustless system. You don't need to trust that your neighbor is not going to covet your wife or your goods or your wealth or your gold or your house or your donkey. He doesn't need even if he did, like it's a built-in structure that it will he can't win it.
Well, also, organized religion tells us or gives us comfort by offering us something that cannot be confiscated, the soul. And people say, oh, you can take everything of mine, but you can't take my dignity. You can't take my soul. And so that idea is developed in parallel with, for hundreds of thousands of years, with the tendency toward humans to take everything from other people violently. You say, well, my soul is intact. Well, here with Bitcoin, actually, you don't need a soul because your Bitcoin is unconfiscatable. And, or I should say, you don't need organized religion, to be more precise, because organized religion is also another centralized organizing principle that has a lot of pros, but a lot of cons, as Martin Luther proved in as you pointed out earlier with the Reformation, right? It was like organized religion sucks. Here's why. Here's my list, and so that's still true, right? So why do we cling to it? Because we're clinging to the soul, which we perceive as not being unconfiscatable. Well, okay, how about just give me all my Bitcoin, and we'll have, and I don't give a shit about my soul necessarily in terms of its relation to organized religion. I know, well, I've got my own personal, being that I'm taking care of, and I don't need an organized third party to intermediate between me and God, right? Because that's what organized religion tries to do. They try to become the central banker for God. It's like, you get to heaven as long as you do what we say here in this organized religion. Okay. That's obviously nonsense.
So when the center would collapse, then it did give rise to those lords and that feudal system, and why the serfs, in the original days of this, why they agreed to this situation was because of the danger and the chaos of no power, like the vacuum of power. So with Bitcoin, look at this, look how that structure works. So, okay, they said there's a concentration, a centralization of Bitcoin mining power in China, right? Mm-hmm. Then China decides the central power, the central authority starts to ban it. You can't mine Bitcoin here. They disperse all over the place. And an amazing thing, right? And incentivizes more miners to come online, because now the difficulty adjustment dropped, making it way more powerful, way more profitable to mine. So I saw these interesting stories about this company in Thailand Thai Telecom, JTS, is to install 50,000 mining machines before the next Bitcoin halving. Quote, the company plans to have 5% of the total global mining capacity. This would bring about 5 exahashes of power onto the network and would make JTS the largest Bitcoin mining operation in Southeast Asia. So now if you're a serf in feudal Europe, you're working the land, you pay the taxes to the knight who gives it to the lord, and you hope they protect you, right? You have to contribute like that for them to protect you. With Bitcoin, JTS, a telecoms company in Thailand, is working for you. They're going to come secure your wealth, secure your value.
Exactly right. It's flipped on its head.
It's broken that neo-feudalism. It's broken that feudal model that we've had really in one form or another for over 1,000 years.
I think that's a good point. I think that's a good point.
I mean, look at that.
Who's working for who?
Who's working for who?
If you have a few Bitcoin, a few Satoshis.
Or one Satoshi fuck you money.
Right. And this Thai telecom company has come out and said, we're going to help you get rich.
We're going to well, not even that. We're going to provide those services. The Lord had to provide security services for the people, his peasants and his vassals, right? Mm-hmm. He had to provide that he had to pay for it. That was his obligation under the feudal contract.
They're adding hash to the network, which protects it.
Here, they're providing security to you without any. You don't need to till his land. You don't need to do any serf labor for them.
They're adding 5 exahash of night power to the network to protect your wealth.
To protect your wealth, not to make you wealthy, but to protect your wealth, to protect your property.
Which coincidentally, you will actually get wealthier because all that extra security would increase its attractiveness as a safe haven. Yes. Therefore, pulls money out of the unsafe fiat money world, and price goes up. Its number go up technology.
So I think we're fortunate to be at this moment right now in history. We are winning. Remember, if you look at the Wikipedia again, look back at it, that Peasants' Revolt, it says they lost.
Right.
Like they don't mention they lost that battle but won the war, but they won the war. But it was paid for with hundreds of thousands of peasants' lives lost. And it took a little bit longer for the feudal system to disintegrate, decades after that. But it did set in motion the next phase of human advancement and the Renaissance. So we won. Bitcoin won. Bitcoiners won. If you're orange pilled, you've won. So that's why we're having a victory party in Phoenix on August 19th.
Yeah, that's right.
This is the peasants. It's a pleb revolt, right?
Mm-hmm. It's the pleb revolt. That's guaranteed to win. Mathematically, the physics and the mathematics guarantee victory.
Bitcoin is the pleb revolt. And we've won because we all have at least one Satoshi fuck you money, a perfect unit of truth.
I'm excited.
Right. So, I must say right now, before we exit this episode,
yes,
if you want to join the pleb revolt, you've got to go to swanbitcoin.com/orange pill, get some Satoshis and secure it, right? And this company, JTS in Thailand, is going to help you secure it.
Yeah, sure.
Believe it or not.
Get some pad thai noodles and secure your Bitcoin over in Bangkok. Why not?
And I'll leave under this video, read the description. I'll put some links in there for you. I'll put a link to the Wikipedia on the Peasants' Revolt. I'll also put a link to that the information about the treatise that
You're just giving away links.
That Martin Luther wrote. This is like horrible guy, right? Like he did an amazing thing with the Reformation, but then he's like, kill the peasants.
He would have been deplatformed.
Kill the peasants.
He would have been deplatformed if it was today. We would never have had the Reformation. We'd still be doing papal indulgences.
Well, we have Bitcoin, so that's beyond that. It did happen, and it's too late to deplatform it. So
yeah.
And I'll put a link finally, as I was going to say, to the Eventbrite to buy some tickets to join the the Pleb Revolt in Phoenix on August 19th. We're also going to meet up on August 18th. No big speech or Max on stage in his bikini. It's going to be just some pizza in Phoenix, and I'll put the information there.
Sounds good. I'm excited.
You sound really good.
No, I ate some almonds earlier, and the dust from the nut.
Dusty nuts? Man, this is getting horrible.
Almond nut dust. Sometimes it tickles your throat. You end up coughing a little bit. That's the tricky bit about almonds and the nut dust. You got to be careful. Never eat nuts before you go on air. I've made that mistake. And you start
way too many times.
Coughing. If you see me coughing, it's because I just had some nuts. Not as bad as eating ice before going on stage. I've done that before, and to disastrous results because when I was supposed to start talking and my mouth was frozen, and I'm like, I can't talk. But that's for another time.
That's for another time. A microdose is a good time to dump that information. We'll try it on the next microdose. Max will have some ice before he comes on air. And we'll see, because it's live stream, so we can see the to comic effect, hopefully. All right. Well, that's it. What can we say for the neo-feudal sort of thing? Is there a new...
Arrivederci.
You'd have to come up with something German.
Something German?
Yeah. Do your fake German.
I've been schnaffeln.